that messaging or that positioning coming into the US market isn't going to work, right? You don't have the dominant market share. There's going to be other highly engineered solutions. You're going to have to think about a different way to garner attention coming into this country. And I've seen that in multiple times where you have to start adapting that messaging, understand that you can't maybe come in and with as brash or as confident a message here. It may have to be a little bit different. You may have to build a different relationship to your position.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Value Driven Marketing Podcast. We are on a journey to discover what it takes to successfully break into a new market, analyzing specific countries one at a time. And in this episode, we are discussing expanding into the United States. Together with my guest, Chris Eifert of Luxid, we will tackle the different cultural and business nuances with a focus on Midwest, as well as discuss how to adapt your positioning and messaging to the American market, how to handle segmentation, critical success factors, and much more. But first, I would like to introduce Chris. Chris Eifert is the managing director in the US for Luxid Group. His career spans more than 30 years of sales, marketing, and management experience. Chris joined Tricom B2B, now Luxid, in 2002 and held several management positions before purchasing the company with his partner, John Buscemi, in 2006. Before joining Tricom B2B, Chris served in product and marketing management roles for SmartWorks, a strategic business unit of Standard Register. And before that, Chris held a variety of engineering, sales, product development, and marketing roles at two industrial manufacturers, Flowserve Corporation and Watlow Electric Manufacturing Company. Chris is an active member of Chief Executive Network and serves on advisory boards for small businesses. If you enjoy our content, please consider following the podcast here on Spotify or on YouTube, or share it with a friend. I hope you learn a ton from this episode, and I'll catch you on the next one. Hey, Chris, welcome to the Value Driven Marketing Podcast. Good to have you.
Thanks, Elena. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. How are things in Dayton? And I should say good morning, right?
Yes, it's still morning. We're starting to get into that weather transition from summer to fall. It's a beautiful time of year. In kind of the, I guess we're in the central eastern part of the country, which we call the Midwest, interestingly. So, but yeah, we're in Ohio in the United States, and it's a beautiful time of year. And we're excited about having this conversation with you.
Same here. So, Chris, before we dive in, I would like to know more about Luxid. Who do you guys serve and how do you help? Can you tell me more?
Yeah, for sure. So Luxid Group is a multinational marketing agency. We're actually headquartered in Finland, in Helsinki. I'm the managing director for our U.S. business. And the way that came about is we were actually acquired. Our former company was acquired in February of this year and became part of Luxid Group as their U.S. growth platform. So Luxid Group on the whole has two locations in Finland, another in the UK, and two in the United States, here in Ohio and also in Austin, Texas. And together we are an integrated agency that kind of brings creativity and technology and data together. And we serve primarily business to business clients who are really growth driven, trying to grow their businesses. And we help them in that journey from brand and storytelling through digital experience, through MarTech and demand generation, all the way through data and analytics. So it's a really diverse company in terms of skill sets, in terms of creative and technologist and data scientist. And so we have a great value proposition that we bring to B2B enterprises that are growing quickly. And also we serve some direct to consumer clients as well.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to learn about Luxid. Chris, thank you for sending me two articles that you've wrote, which I will share with our audience. And I want to start with something with an excerpt from one of the articles that said, culture express ideas differently you must be careful to understand nuances to be effective. So that hit hard for me, and I want to start from here. Let's talk about the communication style that is preferred over in the US.
Yes, before we dive in and start describing the United States culturally and from a business perspective, I think it's important to note that the United States is huge, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
330, 340 million people, and we're probably, up to a dozen different types of markets and cultures within this country, depending on where you are and even what type of person you're talking to. So I will definitely speak in generalities today, but I think
Okay.
it's really important to recognize that even within the United States, depending on where you are and who you're talking to, just from an, an ethnic diversity standpoint, it can be quite different. Every situation is kind of its own situation. So I'd say from a communication style in a business setting, in general, we are we're big on building rapport, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think I think having at least going through the courtesy of developing a relationship and kind of expressing interest in each other as individuals um, is is really important in most cases. Again, that can vary depending on type, what part of the country you're in. But I think that rapport building is the number one thing that I see. There is an expectation, if you want to say, for small talk, right? And
Okay.
it's not necessarily just dive right in and let's start having the conversation. Now that may change if you go to the coast, the East Coast or the West Coast. That tolerance for small talk and, hey, like we just did, how's the weather? Like, how are things doing in Ohio? Probably a shorter attention span for that, and they want to get more to the point. In the center or the south of the country, it might be a little bit more about, hey, let's move slowly and let's get to know each other a little bit differently. So that's from a communication style. I think that's one thing to be aware of. I think also, um, as it relates to how we make decisions and how we go about talking with um, in a room and presenting to a room. It's important. There's hierarchy, and we need to know what the hierarchy is, but it's really not as formal as other cultures. Everybody's using first names pretty much immediately, and we're a little bit casual in that regard. We do know who the decision makers are and who the influencers are, but again, we're treating most everybody with the same level of respect versus very hierarchically. So those are some of the initial things that come to mind that in a business setting would be a little bit maybe different than other cultures you might run into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That resembles a bit, I guess, with the Finnish culture, as
Uh,
I'm aware.
Yeah, so I've actually just spent a week in Finland just a couple of weeks ago for my second trip there. And I would say we're very similar, kind of center of the country in the United States, I think resembles a lot of what I've experienced in Finland, which is a similar working style, very much a roll up your sleeves work ethic, very hard workers, very committed to their work. I would say Finnish culture is probably a little bit more direct in terms of communication style than we might be in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We might take a little bit longer to get to the point as Americans than Finland will be probably a little bit more direct, but not in a way that is abrasive, just in a way that's faster.
Okay, more efficient.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And could we dive in a bit into, let's say, more of the softer elements of culture and mentality? So, how would you say that Americans go about making decisions, or at least in the Midwest?
Yeah. So again, I think probably the first thing to know is that we move fast. I think
Mm-hmm.
the decision making process isn't one that we like to go through iterations on. And again, I'm probably projecting a little. I have to be careful. I'm going to project a little bit of my own beliefs and my own style, but we don't like to deliberate extensively as business culture. We like to move very quickly. So I think speed is valued very much in U.S. culture, especially in the businesses that I've worked in. So I would start there. And as I mentioned before, there's hierarchy for sure, and there's also influencers. But decisions aren't necessarily consensus based
Mm-hmm.
here. I would say the decision maker in the room, or figuratively in the room, makes the decision. It's often is made at the top by an executive or whomever has been designated as the decision maker. They'll take input, but ultimately it does often come down to one or two people's decisions, not a large group of people who are making that decision. So it's fast. It's generally
Hmm.
made at a single point. And once that decision is made, it is not expected to be deliberated or second guessed very much. We move forward and we expect action, and it's time to move forward with whatever that decision is. We're moving forward with it at that point. So that is one thing. Now, as a result of the fact that it is often made by a single person or a very small group of people, a decision, if it's a bad decision, it's often very hard to unwind because, there's a lot of personal value that is placed, the acceptance of risk that person took on, right? And I guess the
Hmm.
expectation of success that person has set by making that decision. Oftentimes, it's hard to unwind that decision because you do have personal egos involved, and you have kind of that personal investment that has been made.
And because you mentioned risk, what would you say is the general attitude towards risk? Are you risk driven? Are you more cautious in nature?
So I would say I'll break that down into two pieces. I would say there's a generation that I'm part of, which is personally, I am not risk averse, but I'll speak for maybe our generation, what we call the baby boomers and the Gen Xers. We were raised in an environment, a business culture that was. There's an expression here in the United States: you never get fired for hiring IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
if you've not heard that before in the audience, that basically means we were raised in an environment where there were trusted brands that we more or less just granted our trust to because they had the gravitas and the industry reputation to go ahead and kind of just own that trust with with decision makers. I would say as you look at millennials and Gen Zs, who now make up, by the way, about 65-70% of decision making in B2B. So let's give them their due. I'd say they're more risk averse. They're more willing to take a chance, look at a supplier or a platform that may not be as tried and true. And the reason for that is if you think about younger generations have been raised in watching tech startups and new companies emerge literally on a daily basis and have grand success and have earned their trust over time. And I think younger decision makers aren't as easily swayed by, oh, well, it's always been this way. I think they're much
Mm-hmm.
more open minded. I think they're more willing to take a chance and try something new. And I think that's super healthy for business because you see emerging players who have great capabilities and a better value proposition that are getting chances to win business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is great. And I do want to turn a little bit back to what you mentioned earlier about the fact that there is a hierarchy. There's one decision maker who actually takes the final decision. You want to move quickly. So how, from the perspective of a company trying to expand in the US, how should they approach trying to open a relationship?
Wow, that's a tough one for sure because you have to, I think, create an understanding anyway that you can solve a problem that your potential customer, your prospect faces. And I think where I've seen success mostly with companies who have tried to enter into the US market is a couple of things. One is the investment. Like they're a half measure of coming into the market and saying, we have a great product, but all we've really done is set up a distribution network or maybe a manufacturer's representative network, but we're really not doing anything
Mm-hmm.
physically in the United States. So I say that's the first step is I think, especially if you're in manufacturing, you have a physical product. I think being here and having a physical infrastructure of some sort, whether it's manufacturing or distribution centers, inventory, whatever that looks like, is mandatory. It's a really difficult market to penetrate if you haven't shown that level of commitment. As it relates to software and services, I think it's the same thing. I think you have to have invested in at least some type of business infrastructure here to support that. And so that's the first step, which is a significant level of investment. I would say the second thing is, and since we're marketers, let's talk a little bit about messaging and messaging nuance. I think it's tempting to do language adaptations, translations, and
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, we're now ready for the United States market. I think it's got to be much more than that. Just like we would if we were going into a South American market, or if we were going into a European market, we would want to adjust for cultural nuance. Um, we have seen cases where in Europe, and I'll pick on a German company as an example, where the dominant market share in their own market and kind of a reputation for very, very high level of engineering, that messaging or that positioning coming into the US market isn't going to work, right? You don't have the dominant market share. There's going to be other highly engineered
Mm-hmm.
solutions. You're going to have to think about a different way to garner attention coming into this country. And I've seen that in multiple times where you have to start adapting that messaging, understand that you can't maybe come in and with a as brash or as confident a message here. It may have to be a little bit different. You may have to build a different relationship through your positioning. So I think that's also really important. And some of the things we just talked about, um, how you approach sales, how you approach presentations, how you build rapport, all of those things are going to come into play to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, okay, that's super interesting. I guess one more question on the cultural mentality side of things would be: would you say there's a specific faux pas or something, a mistake you must never make when trying to open a business relationship with a company in the States?
Yeah. So, yes, probably a handful of them. And I would say, first of all, I think and this is an easy one for anyone, like we really value punctuality, like
Okay.
being on time. Right. So not showing up late for meetings, making sure you hit your phone calls on time, and just being present and accounted for exactly when you say. That's a level of dependability, and
Mm-hmm.
and it and
Mm-hmm.
it, and it I think doing so communicates a lot about your company, right, and how you respect the potential customer that you're with. I would say from a faux pas standpoint, of course, right now, very little, if any, discussion about politics. We are,
Mm-hmm.
obviously a country right now that has there's a lot of noise on the extremes on both sides, and therefore it's a really difficult conversation to into, even with family and friends, much less in a business environment. So, and then the usuals, like, in terms of talking about salary and wealth and religion, those types of things. Those are all definitely still business faux pas. I will say that the discussion of salary and earnings is becoming more and more common,
Mm-hmm.
as much more so than my generation. We never spoke of such things, right? It is definitely something, though, that is talked about more openly. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's healthy, right? And it holds employers accountable, and it lets people know what their value is. And there's nothing negative to that. It's just different. That's one thing that might be a little bit has changed over time, but all of the other things I mentioned are still very much business faux pas.
Chris, you've already allured to the idea that you need to adapt the messaging, the positioning as well, but that also starts with knowing the market first, right?
Hmm.
So, can we start here? Where should you go? Which sources would you recommend the company goes to in order to research the market? And I know, again, the market is very big, so maybe we can start with specific recommendations.
Sure. So, and I've actually made a couple of notes in that regard, because
Oh,
there's so many that's okay. There's so many options depending on what you're trying to do, that I felt I kind of created some categories of tools and sources that you might go to. I think if you're looking at the US market or trying to understand a vertical point of entry or some sector that you think is attractive, and you want market and industry data, I think IBIS World and Frost and Sullivan, sources like that, usually have a lot of information. Now, they also come with a cost, generally speaking,
mm,
right, to access their data, but those are excellent resources where we've seen a lot of success in gathering market and industry data. I will add to that, though, that the trade associations, and we have a very extensive industry of trade associations that align with all of these different vertical markets and product categories that serve the US industries, are also a great source of information if you're looking for that market and industry data. And then the US government itself, depending on what you're looking for, whether it's Census Bureau or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you're in the energy, I think it's called IEA, there's so many resources that are publicly available that you can tap into. So, super amount of publicly available information from our government. Now, if you are getting more specific and you're looking at your competitive positioning, or you want to
Mm-hmm.
know more about kind of what customers look like, it's going to be a lot of probably what you already experience, which is you can use Zoom Info, you can use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and then there's third-party resources like Gartner and Forrester, which have a wealth of information. Again, those would be more pay to play, but those would
Mm-hmm.
be the most common that you would look at, maybe from a customer and a competitor standpoint, to really understand what your positioning might be, what those opportunities look like from a competitive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Those are great recommendations. And in terms of understanding the voice of customers, understanding what potential clients are looking for, are there specific directories that you would recommend? Reddit, something else?
Yeah. So when I think about voice of customer, obviously that gets down into oftentimes just doing your own legwork, right? And that could be hiring an agency or a marketing research company to start performing that type of, whether that's field research that they're doing, survey work that they're doing, however you want to acquire that information. That's probably going to come from your own kind of personal investment, if you will, in trying to get that information. Of course, there are all sorts of other resources in like social media platforms and discussion forums where that you can tap into to kind of get a sense for what is
Mm-hmm,
happening
mm-hmm,
in a particular market. And there's probably a wealth of tools that you can use that are monitoring those, whether that's public relations measurement tools like Cision or Meltwater. That there are lots of tools who are monitoring what is going on out there and kind of aggregating sentiment and things that are happening and what competitors are doing in terms of their maybe their share of voice in their marketing efforts, or even some tools that will look at their spend and their
mm-hmm,
investment in
mm-hmm.
marketing. Um, some of those names escape me right now, but there are plenty of third party tools that you can tap into to do that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I have one in mind as well, but again, it's escaping my mind.
Yeah,
We might be thinking about the same tool. Okay, Krista, you mentioned that putting a good amount of investment to play, so investing before you go into the US, that's a big, maybe success factor, if you like. And you mentioned that local presence is important, especially if you have like a physical product. What would you say are other important success factors outside of course, the investment size and local presence?
sure. I I would say the one thing that's always hard to replicate in a lot of industries and makes markets hard to penetrate is distribution, right? So, do you have a channel to market? So, if you're a manufactured product or something physical that you are distributing to customers, or delivering to customers, I think having an established distribution network that has access to your customers is another. Again, this gets a little bit more to the investment, but it's more about developing your channel than it is developing your own manufacturing or your own service centers. As an example, there are so many established large entities here, depending on what market you're in, that have either set up their own infrastructure for distribution or have set up their own very extensive third party distribution networks. I would think that's another area that needs to be looked at very closely. And I know we see that when we have our clients going outside of the US, the first thing they're
Mm-hmm.
doing is trying to figure out how to set up their channels, right? How are they going to get to market, whether that's through representative network or some other captive distribution network or third party distribution network. So That's probably the other kind of missing link to setting up your own infrastructure. And with that goes hand in hand, how do you organize your selling effort? Are you going to invest in direct sales
Mm-hmm.
resources, or are you going to again rely on third party representatives to do the work for you? And so I would think those are some other things that I think are super important to invest to set up for success here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely hiring, as you said, establishing your channels to market, very, very important, especially when there's a physical product, but even for, I guess, for a SaaS as well. I was wondering if we could summarize like the main concerns that a local company would have when being approached by, let's say, a European company.
Sure, I think the first thing I mentioned earlier. I we don't No matter how big your brand is and no matter how well established you are, I think decision makers today are less likely to grant you the trust, that you
Mm-hmm,
need to do business just from the outset, just because you have a logo that's recognizable. I think our younger decision makers value things a little bit differently in terms of they want to know what you stand for as a brand. They want to see it, and they want to see it demonstrated. Not just the products and services that you are offering, but also what you stand for just as a business, I think. And whether that can be in the area of sustainability, responsible behavior as a business, right? And how do you handle the bigger picture of your business, not just the products that you serve. So in that regard, I think a lot of transparency around your brand, um,
mm-hmm,
and the kind of the why of why you do business. And then the second part of that, earning trust, of course, is to, even if you don't have the case studies, how do you develop the the examples of the work that you're doing that reflect the type of business that you're trying to approach in the United States, right? So you may not have that from the outset, but you're going to need to very quickly demonstrate that you've solved a problem exactly the
mm-hmm.
same as the types of problems that your potential customers in the United States are trying to solve as well. So I think just that, and again, that's not a huge revelation. Yes, you're going to need case studies that demonstrate you can do what you say you can do, but I guess I would just layer onto that a a pretty good investment in brand and making sure people understand that it's more than what you offer, it's what you stand for as a business. I think I'd make that a big part of kind of penetrating this market, because the decision maker today is not what it was 10 years ago, was definitely not what it was 20 years ago. And there's just a different expectation in terms of what a company communicates in this market.
Very interesting insight, and I haven't given much thought to, yeah, the bigger picture and how much that impacts just the ability to
Yeah.
open doors and conversations.
Yeah. And again, and just Elena, and just to reiterate, I think that's not a function of our market as much as it's as of our geography, as it is the result of a changing dynamic. And just in terms of the decision makers are changing, right? We have a new group of talented young decision makers that own 70% of the decisions in B2B now. So the expectations have changed, and I would imagine that's probably true in many cultures beyond the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're just beginning the series of expanding into a new market, so I guess I'll learn along the way. It's just
Yeah,
the third episode, and I'm very curious to learn what would you say are the the characteristic or the skills that you value personally.
I would say if I'm thinking in terms of maybe the messaging and the style of marketing message and even selling message that probably resonates best here, and I guess I would fall back on the principle that I've always fallen back on, which is almost every decision we make, we think it's rational, right? That
Hmm.
we have facts and figures and spreadsheets and things that have guided us, and we've made a very rational decision. Clearly, it's this decision over these other two options. Um, Ultimately, there's so much science that shows us that that's absolutely not true. We're using that information to gather some thoughts and recommendations in our head, but at the end of the day, our decisions that we make are pretty irrational. They're highly emotional, right?
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
about a gut feeling or an instinct. And again, there's plenty. I won't get into it today, but there's plenty of science that would indicate that. And I think in the US market, we have figured out, just in terms of how we communicate as marketers, that it can't just be the fact sheets and the specs and the website that has all the products listed, and we hope that people are going to buy it. There, we do need to strive for a higher level of communication that connects with decision makers at a more personal level, whether
Okay.
that's their own personal value or maybe even something more aspirational than that. There's a concept, I think, from about, gosh, it goes back maybe 7 or 8 years now, called the B2B elements of value, which was a study done by Bain here in the United States, which talked about that hierarchy of communication and where decisions actually get made in B2B. And it very much proved out that at that inspirational and personal value level, that's the messaging that resonated. Those were the companies that were communicating that at that level were winning more decisions in
Mm-hmm.
B2B.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the US market, especially in terms of how we communicate, has adopted that. And we've not moved away from the facts and the figures and the table stakes that you have to do business. But we understand that if we're not connecting and resonating at a personal level, we're probably not going to be successful. So I think that's a big, I don't know if it's a difference, but it's something to know about, like, entering this market in terms of where you have to connect in your marketing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And can we talk a little bit about the channels? What would you say are the best ones in order to reach decision makers? So is it a specific one?
So that's a tough question to answer. And because it's going to vary by market, it's going to depend on the type of decision makers that you're trying to target. I would say what we're seeing as an emerging trend anyway is obviously the social media and paid advertising and paid promotions through social media have become more and more and more prevalent, which is exciting to see, because there's so many things you can now do in platform versus having to drive people to a website or take them off
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else, that are really high value, whether it's delivering thought leadership content or actually doing some really more bottom funnel demand gen in platform and paid social media. Um, but we're also exploring a little bit different. So if you think about discussion forums like Reddit,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of high quality conversation and content being produced, basically user produced content, right? And insights being formed and delivered across forums like Reddit. And there are some great avenues for doing some highly targeted messaging and marketing within those forums that we're starting to experiment and see. And I would add that we're also not quite experimental, but we're kind of just at the tip right now of entering into contracts with influencers in the B2B space, and the highly considered purchase, very industrial or technical space. There are some really strong influencers with great audiences, with a great point of view, that we're tapping into and entering into contracts on behalf of our clients with. And so that's also been super exciting as another avenue to look at, where you have immediate access to an audience through maybe a third party that has a really good reputation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a very interesting development and good to hear about it.
Hmm.
So Chris, there's this question that stuck to my mind when you said, of course, the US is a big market. Is there any sort of, I don't know, process that you would be able to, let's say, advise companies that are considering the states, of how they should filter down and maybe choose one region to focus on?
Yeah.
I would assume there are many factors that come into play, but would you be able to kind of formulate some sort of a process?
Yeah, I think you can look. I think the way the US market works, it is possible to actually segment
Hmm.
geographically.
Okay.
So just as an example, so if you, and I'll just, this will be dangerous, going to do this off the top of my head, but if you think about the West Coast, right, a lot of technology, Silicon Valley, mostly in California, maybe in Austin, Texas as well. If you think about aerospace, you're probably going to end up in the Northwest of the country, right, where a lot of the aerospace companies are. If you think about hardcore manufacturing, maybe related to automotive, you're going to be more around where we are in the Midwest area where there's a lot of manufacturing related to automotive and also other industrial sectors. The East Coast might be more lean more toward financial services and those types of markets. So you can look at our and then of course I can't miss Texas and kind of the Gulf Coast and energy, right? Oil and gas and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
energy related businesses. So there are ways to look at our market geographically and say, okay, yes, there's all types of businesses everywhere across the United States, but we do have concentrations geographically that make the market maybe a little bit easier to look at geographically. And then, of course, as you guys know, there's so many great ways to target with your marketing and promotion, find the right audiences in the right geos using intent data to figure
Mm-hmm.
out what's going on in those verticals and really be efficient and smart with your investment and how you use media to reach different audiences. So we're doing it for our own agency. There are very specific geos that we're targeting that are right for our types of clients. And by doing so, we can be a little bit smarter with our investments and be super focused.
Mm-hmm. Could we talk about a successful story of a European company maybe that has expanded into the US and how they've made it?
Yeah, I think one of the great examples that just comes to mind when you ask me that question was a client that I used to work with maybe about a decade ago
Mm-hmm.
called Rittal Corporation, and they make enclosures and other types of hardware and even software and cooling systems for all types of electronics and data centers and beyond. So a really interesting company. And I want to say that in this was again more than a decade ago, but they had 95% market share in Germany, right? And that was their market.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe three to 3.5 decades ago, they decided the US was going to be a growth market for them. And all of the principles that I talked about earlier they really followed a big investment in setting up a plant and manufacturing. I'm sure it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but they made a huge investment in establishing a presence, being able to manufacture or at least do the value added assembly of their product here in the United States from the get go. They established a very, very strong sales network, direct sales, distribution. And then again, so we marketers are like, well, what do they do for marketing? I think what they understood very quickly was that when you have 95% or 90% market share in your domestic market, you come here and you have zero, right? And you're going up against great companies like at that time it was Hoffman and APC who had very highly engineered products and big market share. You had to look at your messaging completely different. You can't come in and say, I think one of their old taglines from Germany was switch to perfection or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which you cannot come into the US market with that confidence and bravado as a disruptor and say, well, we're here, right? So, and we're great in Germany, so we'll be great here too. And so they did a really good job of understanding that nuance and then in creating a new US um, language, if you will, almost on how they wanted to communicate. That was, and again, I can't get into the specifics of what
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
platform looked like, but it was a lot different. And they had to change just, from being a dominant market share player and kind of that messaging to something a little more subtle, a little bit more about the difference they can make, problems they could solve, finding a different way to connect with decision makers. So all of the things we talked about, big infrastructure investment, really smart investments in sales and distribution so that they would be set up, and then the marketing adjustments to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that they were cognizant of what the audience in the US and how they might perceive a new entrant, versus somebody who's really well established in Germany.
Yeah, that's a very good message to take home. I think adapting your positioning and your messaging and not just bringing as is in your home market. So, very good message to take away.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And one final advice you would give a business owner that is considering the States for expansion?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just go back to, don't assume everything is the same here. It's big,
Mm-hmm.
it's diverse, it's culturally diverse. You're going to run into and meet a lot of different people. One of the most powerful and interesting decision makers I ever met was at a US based company, but this person was from South America and Colombia. And so communication style and the way we work with her was completely different, right? Than we might have if we were to just generalize, oh, this is how we want to communicate. So you're going to run into that everywhere, right? We have cultural differences that are baked inside of companies that have their own cultures, right? And
Mm.
and that can depend on geography in the vertical market that you're in as well. So just be careful not to generalize and stereotype. Really understand the geography that you're in and the cultural differences you're going to experience even within the businesses because it is a super diverse country and
Hmm.
things can change rapidly and your approach needs to change accordingly.
Okay, that's an episode packed with so much useful information, but also quite new to me, I would say. And, hopefully for the audience. Chris, thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure to speak to you. Is there anything you think I've left out and you felt it was important?
No, it was really interesting, good challenging questions and made me think a lot about our market as well. And I'll just say really happy to do this. I really admire your company and the
Oh,
things that Stoica are doing. And it's an honor to be a part of your program as well. You guys are doing some great things.
the honor is ours. We're like a small kid learning from the big players, and hopefully one day we will be some sort of Luxid in Romania. But yeah,
I'm sure
thank
you
you so
will.
much, Chris. Oh, thank you,
You're,
thank you.
you're welcome,
That's very
Elena.
kind.